And our featured story, I'm sure you've heard about it. There was a terrorist attack in Washington, D.C. An Afghan national targeted, ambushed, and shot 2 National Guardsmen about a mile away from the White House. He was identified as a 29-year-old, basically an Afghan refugee. They claim he shouted Allahu Akbar when he did the shooting. And this is a story from the New York Times. It says, quote, "The suspect accused of critically wounding 2 National Guard members in a shooting near the White House entered the country in 2021 through a refugee program for people fleeing from Afghanistan. Local officials said the suspect, who was injured after opening fire in a busy tourist area, appeared to have acted alone, targeting members of the West Virginia National Guard. The suspect was identified as Ramanullah Lakanwal, age 29.
Wow.
He came to the United States through a program known as Operation Allies Welcome, which provided entry to Afghan nationals fleeing the Taliban takeover of their country after the withdrawal of U.S. troops under President Joe Biden. President Trump in Florida on Wednesday said on social media that the gunman would pay a very steep price. He also ordered a deployment of 500 additional troops to Washington to supplement the more than 2,000 already on the ground. Also said we need to review everybody that's here on a visa, if that's worth anything. Now, about this story, it's like I said at the top of the show. So this 29-year-old Afghan shoots 2 National Guardsmen. And people are going to read the name, which is Ramanullah Lakanwal, and they're going to hear the national origin, Afghanistan. They're going to hear about how he arrived here, ostensibly as a refugee, apparently. And everyone's going to draw some conclusions about who this guy is. They're going to say this is a fanatical Muslim from a Muslim country that we went to war with. We went to war, we bombed them, we engendered hatred, then we brought them here. They hate us, and now they're killing us. He was motivated by his radical, fanatical religion, ideology. He shouted Allahu Akbar, killed Americans, and what we see is what we get. And that's one way to look at it. Maybe that's the case, because all that is true. He is effectively a refugee from Afghanistan, probably is a fanatical Muslim, or could be. Could be. It's plausible. He shot these Americans. They claim he yelled Allahu Akbar. So maybe he hates America. Maybe he hates what America is doing with Israel and Gaza. Maybe he hates what America did in Afghanistan. Who knows? Maybe it's PTSD. Maybe because he was a fighter.
I feel like it's okay to ask these type of questions. We can't stereotype, but we could ask questions. If something like this did happen, somebody was involved, some type of crime, somebody got shot, and it's very, very serious, I feel like you gotta ask questions. You gotta investigate the cause. You gotta investigate the person. A lot of people will disagree. A lot of people will be like, okay, why is he straight out the bat judging these type of people just because of the name, because of where they come from, etc.? I feel like at the end of the day, chat, we gotta ask these type of questions. I 100% agree with that.
Or was involved with American forces in some way. Maybe it's like PTSD, who knows? But we have to understand exactly what this is. And a lot of people don't know. That when the United States conducted its operation in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, we recruited support from the locals, the local tribes, militias, soldiers. We recruited the locals to help in many different capacities as we were fighting the conflict. As security forces, military forces, as translators, in a number of different roles. And this is why he was brought to America under the program. It's called Allies Welcome. Why is it called Allies Welcome? Because these are not just any refugees. These are not women and children. These are not fleeing refugees, not strictly speaking. Allies Welcome. These are collaborators. These are collaborationists. These are not Afghans that were with the Taliban or ISIS-K. These are Afghans who were working with the United States military and special forces and probably working with them for many years.
Wow.
And living with them and working with them and ostensibly supporting the goals of the American occupation. That's how we got here. Allies Welcome. In 2021, when the Taliban retook control over the country, of course, everybody that was collaborating with the United States is going to be killed. The United States is fighting the Taliban for 20 years. We took power from them. We controlled Afghanistan. When we left, the Taliban filled the void. And actually, we beat a retreat. We were being defeated by the Taliban.
That year in 2021, when it happened, it was possibly the most embarrassing thing that could have ever happened to America. It was all over the news. I still remember 4 years ago when it hit the news and everybody was just, you obviously had people who agreed with it, who thought it was a good thing, but you also had people who thought it was a bad thing. A lot of people agreed that America should have gotten out, but they should have never gotten out the way that they got out. It was very, very cowardly.
Effectively, Taliban was taking over anyway. We could not maintain control of the country from a distance or indefinitely. And so everybody working with the United States was going to be probably captured and imprisoned or killed by the Taliban. So we brought all of our collaborators back to the United States because we owe them. We owe these people. Like we owe the Israelis, like we owe the Kurds, like we owe the Ukrainians. We owe these people in Afghanistan, so they say. So we bring this guy over under Operation Allies Welcome. And again, is this guy a fanatical Muslim? It would seem not, on the basis of how he came here. He didn't come here as a refugee. He came here basically as a U.S. mercenary. Big difference. He didn't come here as a refugee fleeing persecution and violence, although in a sense he was. He was fleeing persecution and violence because he was a U.S. government employee. That's why he was being persecuted. That's why he was fleeing. So he's really a U.S. government employee who was extracted from Afghanistan. He would continue living in Afghanistan if a friendly government remained. If we remained, he would still be there. He was extracted from Afghanistan by his patron that he was a client for, by his boss, the United States. That's how he came here. Not an ordinary refugee, not part of mass migration or anything like that. And so this changes how we look at the attack. Was this guy some Muslim extremist? Well, it would seem that would be unlikely because there are many Muslim extremists in Afghanistan. You've got ISIS-K, the Khorasan group. You've got the Taliban. You got the Pakistani and the Afghan Taliban. You've got Balochistan and the separatists over there. You've got a lot of sectarian violence. You've got a lot of ethnic, tribal, religious violence in this region. Afghanistan is really not a real country. It's a hodgepodge of a bunch of different tribes and ethnicities. You've got Turks, you've got Pashtun, you've got a lot of different kinds of people living there.
Yeah, that's right.
And so it would seem that if this guy was working with the United States, probably he was not a fanatic. Probably he was not a radical Muslim, a Taliban supporter, an ISIS supporter, because he would have been working with the enemy of those groups.
Infiltration. Infiltration. It is what it is.
He's a U.S. mercenary. So who is this guy really? The family says they're surprised because they said he loved the United States. So is this a Muslim refugee that killed Americans for Islamism? Or is this a former U.S. service member who went off for some reason? And it raises some questions. Understanding this, you might wonder, so this is not, Ramanullah, the Taliban member. This is Ramanullah, the government employee. What did they do to this guy? Who is this guy? It begs the question, did they put him up to this? If he was being handled by the U.S. military, what is their responsibility in all this? Because you do hear about false flags and you do hear about these kinds of things. And right now, it is true that there's a lot of chaos and violence in the Middle East. It's also true that Israel and the United States have far-reaching geopolitical ambitions there. Israel wants territory in a number of countries. They want Gaza and the West Bank to be absorbed. They want South Lebanon. They want South Syria. They want regime change in Iran. They want operations in Yemen and Syria and Iraq. And the United States wants its air base in Bagram back. That's what the Trump administration said. They said if he were president, we wouldn't have even fully left Afghanistan. We would have kept the base at Bagram. Why? Why is it important for the United States to have a military base in Afghanistan? Does anybody know? A lot of people don't look at a map. A lot of people don't know their geography, and that's the problem. The reason the United States wants a military base in Afghanistan is because Afghanistan shares a border with China. That's why. And specifically, Afghanistan borders East Turkestan, which is where all those troublesome Uyghur Muslims are from.
It's very common that America does this because, that's the same reason why America has Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Alaska. They have taken control of these places due to the geography of these places. They're closer to their enemies. He's not wrong about this, Chad. A lot of people don't like Nick Fuentes, and I don't agree with everything he says, but there's some things that make sense,
And so if you wanted to spy on China, if you wanted a foothold to project power against China in Central Asia, if you wanted to monitor some of the border disputes or things going on, if you wanted to monitor their activities, maybe you wanted to foment chaos in China, form a land bridge, not just with China, but with their most troublesome population, through Afghanistan might be the way to do it. And of course, all the infrastructure of Bagram could just as easily be used against China as much as it is used against Pakistan or Iran or the Taliban or ISIS-K in the region. That's why they want the base back. And so what has happened since 2021 is the Taliban retook control of the country. The United States lost the foothold there. And now Afghanistan is the gateway for Central Asia into the Indian Ocean. And the Taliban stands to gain from critical mineral wealth. They stand to gain from trade routes through Central Asia. And the United States maybe doesn't want the Taliban to have that kind of leverage and discretion, and they don't want the Taliban to control all that territory. So the United States will not recognize the Taliban as the sovereign government of Afghanistan. I wonder if this has something to do with that in some way, shape, or form, because this is not an ordinary Afghan. And I know this. I was in D.C. a few weeks ago. I had an Uber driver. He was Afghan. We got to talking. I said, "Where are you from?" He said, "Afghanistan." I said, "Oh, did you come here after we left?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, a lot of us came here." He said, "There's a lot of Afghan here, and they're all Uber drivers." And I asked him about Imran Khan, and I asked him about everything that's going on over there. Mm-hmm. And he said, that's the program. He said, "We are government contractors. We're in Afghanistan. We were brought over here. We love America, but we have a lot of problems here." And you almost have to wonder if this is some kind of government operation. Everyone's wondering, is this a false flag?
He's going to say it's the CIA. But it's just my guess because he always blames everything on the CIA. I don't know,
Now, maybe that's far-fetched. I don't think that's the likely explanation, but it's a possible one. And I guess the bigger conversation is about what is happening with the National Guard. I think regardless, maybe that's far-fetched. It's certainly possible that we brought a bunch of people from Afghanistan and one of them is like a Muslim extremist or hates Americans. Certainly possible. Like I'm not going to go four-dimensional chess and say, no, there's no Muslims that kill people ever. That never happens. Like it's possible. And maybe it is far-fetched that he was some MK Ultra guy, it's a false flag guy. But it is worth mentioning he's a U.S. mercenary. So that does make a world of a difference. It's not like he's some random Syrian fighting with al-Qaeda like the current president of Syria. No, he was a U.S. operative. He was on the U.S. payroll, and they brought him here. And they handled him. And you got to wonder what they did to him and who this guy really is, where his loyalties really lie, what that's all about. What's actually the motive there? It's worth pointing out, and it's worth asking the question. But I would say it's bigger than this. I said this earlier in the year. The problem with this administration is when they increase the presence of law enforcement in a symbolic way, they're really playing with fire here.